Hey everyone, so you want to build your next SaaS project, but you're wondering what tech stack you should use? Well, you are at the right place. Let me first say that the tech stack actually doesn't really matter. No one cares if you use Python, no one cares if you use Node.js, PHP, Ruby, Go. The only thing that matters is that whether or not your project and your SaaS work, your end user does not really care about what tech stack you use. Now, don't get me wrong, there is some tech stack that are more appropriate to some task. For instance, if you want to run AI model, you will probably use Python and not PHP. But other than that, in like 90% of the cases, it doesn't matter at all. It mostly depends on what you prefer, what you like, what you already know, and then you can build on top of it. So let's start with the backend. For the backend, you have like three main options, I would say. You can use what I call micro framework, which is basically only router with middlewares, and there is plenty of it in every language possible, like Python, Elixir, PHP, Node.js, etc. The pros of those frameworks is that it's pretty fast, it's reliable, there is a huge community around it, especially for Express, even though if it's kind of deprecated, and it's free and open source. Now, the drawback of that is that it's not battery included, which means you would have to build your own authentication, adding some ORMs, adding some validation stuff, create your entire architecture. You have to code a lot compared to the next one would be full framework, and you have to host it. Now the second option is what I call full framework, which are frameworks that are battery included, which mean that the authentication, the cache, the mailing system, the queue, the jobs, etc., are already included directly inside of the framework. In those frameworks, one of the most famous would be Laravel, which is in PHP. There is an extremely huge community around it, so if you have any problem, it's perfect. If you prefer Node.js, there is Adonis, which is a Node.js framework that no one's talked about for some reason, but it's extremely powerful, and it's basically Laravel for Node.js. So big shout out to Adonis.js. There is also Ruby on Rails, that was the OG, if I may say, where everything is already built in. But this is if you want to use Ruby. And if you want to use Elixir, I guess Phoenix Frameworks is also a possibility. Now, if your project is an MVP or a very small project and you don't want to create and scaffold the entire backend system, you could use what we call it BaaS, which stands for Backend as a Service. It will allow you to create a backend without writing a single line of code. So basically, what a BaaS is a database that you can call directly from your frontend through API queries. There is other functionality. Most often there is like real-time functionalities, authentication. If you want to have some extra backend feature, you have serverless function, and most of the time storage. There is, I would say, 3 or 4 main VAS solutions, which are Supabase, Firebase, and Upright. Between those two, the big difference is whether or not you want to build vendor lock or if you want to have a NoSQL or SQL database. Supabase is based on PostgreSQL, so you can create a relational database, and most importantly, you can download your data. So, for instance, if one day you want to change the entire architecture and you want to go on a real framework, you would be able to download all of your data in PostgreSQL format. So you can just export and then import it inside of another project. So this is for me the best solution. For Rise you have Firebase, which is owned by Google. And the last one is Upright, which is interesting and also NoSQL. Now the pros of BaaS is that it's easy, it's fast to set up, it's hosted for you, but most of the time you will be vendor locked. There could be some privacy issue, limitation. It can be quite pricey if your amount of user keep increasing. Now, for the front-end part, it really depends whether or not your application needs a lot of front-end interaction. For instance, if your app is just a a directory repository, you probably don't need some huge front-end framework, and you would prefer lightweight front-end like HTMX or Alpine, Livewire, which only work with Laravel. But if you have a lot of front-end interaction like animation or complex UX element, you probably go to one of those four front-end framework. Now, obviously, the most famous one is React. Probably everybody know React, but you could use Vue.js, Svelte, and Angular, which are the most famous framework. And now for the frontend, if you do not want to mess up with the UI, the UX, and you're not a designer, you will probably need to have some component library. The most famous one is ShadCN, which is built on top of React, but there is a version for Svelte and Vue.js too. This will allow you to have nice UX and UI elements that you can directly plug inside of your application. There's also a library that are only for UI. So you probably already seen those design elements on some websites, because this library is pretty well used, perhaps even overused if you want my opinion. But yeah, you have plenty of it. Like, of course, using Tailwind will save you time because no one wants to write CSS anymore, and Tailwind works with ShadCN, Flowbyte, DaisyUI. You can use Bootstrap, but no one uses it anymore. This was quite popular back in the days, but now most of people use Tailwind. Now, if you haven't used a backend as a service, you will need a database to host your data. You have several options, SQL or NoSQL. If you use a SQL database or relational database, I would highly suggest you to use Postgres or MySQL or SQLite, etc. And if you do not want to have a SQL database, I would highly suggest you to use Mongo. Now, in vast majority of projects, I think relational database are better than non-relational database, just for the fact of building complex queries and performance and stuff. I think choosing a relational database works in 99% of the cases, while choosing a non-relational database will sometimes not be appropriate. And if you don't want to self-host your database, you can use a service like NeoDB and PlanetScale, which will host the database for you. Now, the only drawbacks of that is that you will probably lose some performance. You cannot beat the performance of having your database directly hosted on the same server, on the same network of your backend. But anyway, if you don't want to mess with the hosting of your database and your data, you can use services like that. Now, of course, you're gonna have to pay. I think it's serverless, so you pay as you go. So this is something you have to take in consideration, is that if you suddenly have a lot of users, the bills might be quite high. So in the front-end dimension, you have something called an SSR framework, aka server-side rendering framework, which basically are a front-end framework that have a part of backend in it that allow them to just render the HTML directly from the server. And on those frameworks, you can build some backend functionalities. Now, you could build a lot of SaaS with only these tags, but don't expect to have a insane and powerful backend system with those kind of text, because this is not really meant for it. But I think it's in 80% of the cases, just using Next or Next can work. This is really good if you only want to learn one languages, aka JavaScript, but aka React or Vue.js or Svelte. For the first one, okay, Next, you have a huge community around it, like a crazy community around it with hundreds of NPM packages and stuff. So it's pretty good. Now, the biggest limitation, like I said, is that you cannot build an extremely complex backend system. This is the main problem. But if you just do a ChatGPT wrapper, then yeah, go for it, because it will be perfect. Now, if you want to build a mobile app, you have in my opinion, four different options. If you already have a website that is currently running and there is a responsive version of the website, like a mobile version, you can just use Capacitor, which will translate your website, your HTML and JavaScript directly inside of a web view for the app. So you would have no additional development to make in order to create your mobile app. The only drawback is that you will not have a lot of native interaction, so the user experience will most likely looks like web experience rather than just a proper native experience. The other option, which I don't really recommend, is using Flutter. I don't think that Flutter is still relevant today. The best option for me is to use React Native, especially if you already know React. You could use React Native and you can build your own application pretty easily. That would work in both Android and iOS. And there is a huge community around it. There is a tool called Expo that will facilitate the entire development process. So this is the best of the entire world. But if you really want to have like native functionalities and go really deep inside of optimization and stuff like that, you could use Swift or Kotlin, which are the native language for building an iOS and Android app. Now the biggest drawback is that you would have to learn two new languages. This is an option if you want to have something really powerful and optimized. So we are in 2025 and there is a huge of AI tool right now that could help you to build your own SaaS. You have two different type of tool, I would say. You have the AI builder and the AI agent. If you want to scaffold and build your application really fast, you could start by using a AI builder tool like Lovable, V0 or Bolt, which allow you to build your website directly from a simple prompt. It's really powerful for scaffolding your application and for designing the UX and the UI, basically designing the interface. Now you have to take in mind that those tools will probably create your application in React because it's the language where the AI has been trained on. Now the main advantages of using those tools is that it's really fast. But the biggest drawback is that you have to pay and you have crazy limitation. For instance, if you want to build a multi-feature website, then forget about it. You can use it to build your main feature and why not the authentication, but the more you try to fix the bugs and adding functionalities, it will start to hallucinate and create new bugs. So at this particular time, I would highly suggest you to download the code that the AI has built and to use a AI agent to build the rest of the application. And the most famous AI agent I would say is Cursor, which is a fork of VS Code. At this time, everybody heard about it. But you also have Windsurf that is owned by OpenAI, I guess now, or Microsoft, I think. And you have the Cloud Code, which is quite trendy right now. Now, AI agents are great. You can build more functionalities than with the AI builder. There is less hallucination, it's more powerful. You can build more feature, but it will also cost you money. But yeah, even though you do not start with AI builder and you start with, I don't know, from a micro framework, the AI agent will help a lot. Now, what is the best stack in my opinion? If you have no clue about which tech stack you should use to build your next SaaS project, I will highly suggest you to only use Next with a relational database. Why Next.js? Because it's React. Everybody use it. There is a lot of plugin, there is a huge ecosystem, you can find help online, and most importantly, the AI has been trained a lot on React, so they perfectly know how to use Next, React, and yeah, I think this is the best stack if you know nothing and you want to start today. I think using Next and a relational database is the way to go. It's not my personal favorite. I prefer to use Laravel because I'm used to it and the ecosystem is crazy and you can build like huge architecture and huge backend. So this is why I prefer. But overall, if you have a small to medium size SaaS project, I would highly suggest you to use Next. And the last thing I didn't talk about was boilerplate. Now, what is a boilerplate? A boilerplate is a code that has been built by someone else and that includes every basic feature that you would want for building a SaaS. For instance, the authentication, the block system, the payment processing, etc., etc. Now, the biggest drawbacks of that is that you have to pay, basically, and it's the code of someone else. So if you want to have a lot of functionalities and you want to build something extremely custom, then boilerplate are not for you. But otherwise, it will speed up the development process by providing you a huge amount of feature that you would need for your SaaS. I think one of the biggest, the most known one is Sheepfast, that has been built by Mark Lu. But otherwise, you can check this website, boilerplaylist.com, and you will see every boilerplate for every different type of frameworks. So yeah, that's what wrap up the video. Now, choose whatever you want. If you do not have a preferred language, I would highly suggest you to use Next, because as you can see, this is where there is the most boilerplate and the huge community, etc., etc. But otherwise, use whatever you want. It won't matter. Your SaaS will probably not generate any revenue, and you will probably not have thousands and thousands and thousands of users, so the performance and the scaling is not that important, at least for now. Once you get some user, you could just move to some bigger frameworks and bigger infrastructure and bigger server, etc., etc. Now, on this video, I haven't talked about tools like mailing tools or payment process stuff. This will be in another video. Well, thanks for watching, and see you next time. Peace.